How would Ethan Carter's life be if he knew that his fiancée, Lily Moore, was alive and about to expose his dark plans? On a gray morning, a luxurious car stopped in front of the morgue, where Ethan, an imposing young man, stepped out with a heart heavy with grief. He had lost Lily suddenly, leaving him devastated and confused. How could a young woman full of life and health pass away like that, without warning? With Lily's body already identified and the conversation with the investigator concluded, Ethan was there only to retrieve her body and bury her discreetly. In his mind, everything seemed under control, but he harbored sinister secrets that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, in the coffin, Lily was not actually dead. She had been poisoned by Ethan, who was plotting to inherit her fortune. However, the young woman regained consciousness just as Jake, a young gravedigger struggling to support his sick mother, was about to bury her alive. Paralyzed by the poison, Lily fought to make any sound that might save her life. At the last moment, the gravedigger heard a groan and, despite his fear, decided to open the coffin. To his surprise, he found Lily alive. With a gesture of compassion, Jake rescued her, offering her water and support. Even traumatized, Lily refused to go to the police, fearing that Ethan would discover she had survived. Concerned, Jake insisted it was the only way to ensure her safety, and together they went to the police. Meanwhile, Ethan received a photo of Lily's supposed grave, believing his plan had been successful. What he didn't know was that Lily was about to give her testimony to the police. With Jake's help, all the evidence against him was gathered, and the truth began to emerge. In a moment of desperation, Ethan ended up confessing his crime and was arrested. Samantha, his lover and accomplice, was not mentioned in the confession, but she would also become the target of investigations. For Lily, recovery was a long road, but with Jake's support, she found the strength to move forward. Love blossomed between them, and Jake left his job as a gravedigger to join Lily in her new life. Together, they began to plan a future filled with hope and love, while Ethan faced the consequences of his actions. The story's conclusion left a sense of renewal and happiness, showing that even after adversity, love and overcoming challenges can prevail. Ethan Carter walked towards his car, his mind clouded with dark thoughts. The image of Lily, with her radiant smile and bright eyes, was now immortalized in his memory. He tried to convince himself that everything would be okay, that his life would return to normal after the burial. But there was something inside him that he couldn't ignore. The weight of his guilt began to manifest, and he felt increasingly tormented. The idea that Lily might be alive haunted him, a shadow that wouldn't let him be at peace. Meanwhile, Lily was struggling to recover. The poison still coursed through her veins, but Jake, the gravedigger who had saved her, was by her side, offering support. He was a kind young man, with a smile that brightened Lily's dark days. However, Jake's life was also complicated. He worked hard to care for his sick mother, leaving him little time and energy to dream of a better future. The friendship that began to blossom between them was a small refuge amid the chaos they both faced. But what they didn't know was that Ethan was about to discover that his fiancée was not dead. The news of Lily's survival reached Ethan unexpectedly. He was in a bar, trying to drown his sorrows in glasses of alcohol, when a friend told him about a young woman who had been found alive after an incident at the morgue. Ethan's heart raced. How was this possible? He had done everything right, followed every step of his meticulous plan. But the thought that Lily could return to his life, now with the truth in her hands, brought a new kind of terror. At the same time, Lily and Jake were at the police station, about to expose everything they knew about Ethan. Lily was nervous, her body trembling at the thought of confronting the man who had almost taken her life. Jake, sensing her discomfort, held her hand firmly. He knew it was a decisive moment, not just for Lily, but for both of them. If Ethan were arrested, they would have a chance to start their lives over. But the possibility of retaliation from Ethan also haunted them. The young gravedigger wondered if he was really doing the right thing by getting involved with Lily. The pressure and anxiety were palpable. Ethan, on the other hand, began to act erratically, worried about the possibility of being discovered. He remembered Samantha, his lover and accomplice, and pondered whether he should seek her out. She had access to information that could help him, but it was also a risk. There was a thin line between loyalty and betrayal, and Ethan didn't know who to trust. What had once seemed like a foolproof plan was now becoming a trap. Meanwhile, at the police station, the tension was at its peak. Lily finally sat in front of the officers, her heart racing. She began to tell her story, each word laden with pain and relief. Jake watched her, admiring her courage. They were facing the monster together, and Lily's strength was inspiring. But as she spoke, memories of happy moments with Ethan surfaced, mingling with the anger and betrayal. How could he have done this to her? The internal struggle between the love she still felt and the pain he had caused was a challenge testing her emotional strength. Ethan, however, was not idle. He decided to seek out Samantha. The conversation between them escalated quickly. Samantha, who had until then believed the plan had been perfect, began to realize that things were spiraling out of control. She felt fear, not just for herself, but also for Ethan. The idea that they could lose everything they had worked for terrified her. What had started as a romance based on ambition was now turning into a nightmare. The pressure was rising on both sides. Lily and Jake faced the possibility of retaliation, while Ethan found himself cornered, unsure how to escape. Each of them was at a crossroads, where their decisions could change the course of their lives forever. The fight for truth and survival tested the limits of each, leading them to question their beliefs and motivations. Love and betrayal, hope and despair, all intertwined in a tangled web of emotions that seemed poised to explode. Ethan was in a state of despair. The revelation that Lily was alive hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt like a hunted man, surrounded by ghosts of the past and the consequences of his choices. The sensation that the ground was opening beneath his feet was constant. He needed to act quickly, but the confusion paralyzed him. On one side was the fear of being arrested, on the other, the growing need to regain control of his life. Meanwhile, the image of Lily, now more alive than ever in his mind, tormented him. At the bar, he let himself be consumed by drink, trying to numb the pain and guilt. Each sip seemed an attempt to erase memories, but only intensified them. He remembered moments when Lily laughed, when she looked at him in a way that made him feel special. How could he have ruined everything? His friend's voice echoed in his mind, saying that Lily had talked about Ethan at the police station. The idea that she could testify against him left him on high alert. Ethan needed a plan, and fast. Meanwhile, at the police station, Lily was in an emotional whirlwind. As she recounted her story to the officers, each word seemed to tear at her wounds. She spoke with a trembling voice but was determined. The memory of the poison that had almost taken her life still haunted her, and the thought of facing Ethan left her paralyzed with fear. Yet she knew she had to do it. Jake, sitting beside her, held her hand firmly, conveying strength and courage. His presence helped her find the determination she needed, but the shadow of the past still weighed heavily on her shoulders. Jake, although supportive, was also grappling with his own demons. He worried about Lily's safety and what might happen if Ethan decided to retaliate. The nights were long and filled with insomnia as he pondered the best way to protect the woman who was beginning to capture his heart. He thought of his sick mother, the responsibilities he carried. The idea of becoming involved in such a dangerous situation made him anxious. However, the connection he was forming with Lily was stronger than his fears. He needed to be strong, not just for her, but for himself. The tension escalated when Ethan decided to meet Samantha. With each step toward her hideout, he felt the weight of his decisions piling up. When Samantha saw him, she immediately noticed that something was wrong. He was different, more nervous and agitated. The conversation that had once been light and full of ambition was now charged with a desperate urgency. Samantha, realizing the change, questioned Ethan about what was happening. He hesitated, but soon found himself telling her about Lily's survival and the possibility of prison. Samantha's expression changed, and she began to realize that Ethan was sinking into a bottomless pit. The idea that everything they had built could crumble terrified her. They were playing a dangerous game, and the cards were being shuffled with every moment. Samantha, who had always been a loyal accomplice, now found herself at a crossroads. She wanted to help Ethan, but she also worried about her own consequences. The pressure was becoming unbearable. As the tensions rose, the police began to investigate more deeply. Lily and Jake became key witnesses, and the case against Ethan was solidifying. However, Ethan's threats were not just empty words. He began to act more aggressively. That night, while the city slept, Ethan prepared to confront Lily. His heart raced, and his mind was filled with questions. What would he say to her? How would she react? Deep down, he knew he had to take responsibility for his actions, but the fear of what that might mean paralyzed him. He found himself in a dilemma: fight for his freedom or face the consequences of his actions. When they finally met, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Their eyes locked, and the silence became deafening. Lily was nervous but felt courage within her. Ethan, on the other hand, was on the verge of an emotional collapse. The conversation began with bitter words and accusations but quickly transformed into something deeper. The truth about what had happened began to emerge. Lily spoke of fear, pain, and how her love for Ethan had turned into a nightmare. Each word she spoke was like a blow to his heart. As Ethan listened to Lily's voice, he began to feel a wave of regret. He remembered happy moments, the smiles, and the dreams they had shared. The revelation that he had destroyed all of that was devastating. As Lily spoke, Ethan began to reconsider his choices. He realized that he had allowed himself to be led down a path of self-destruction. What he had considered a form of control now revealed itself as a prison. In that moment of vulnerability, something unexpected happened. The conversation that began with anger and pain transformed into a space for reflection. Both had to confront their flaws. Ethan realized he was trapped in a vicious cycle of fear and guilt, and the only way to break free was to accept the truth of his actions. He felt as if he had finally awakened from a nightmare, but the weight of reality was overwhelming. Lily, for her part, realized that the fight for justice was also a fight for her own recovery. She could not continue to run from the past, and confronting Ethan was a crucial part of that process. Amid tears, she decided she was not there just to accuse him but to find a path to healing. The desire for revenge gave way to a yearning for understanding. The emotional tension between them reached its peak. The pain they both carried intertwined, and for the first time, they saw each other not as enemies but as victims of their own choices. The meeting did not resolve all their problems, but it brought a new perspective. They realized that the only way to move forward was to face their flaws and accept the consequences that would come. Ethan was in a trance-like state, his mind still processing the depth of Lily's words. The two found themselves at a point that felt both like an end and a beginning. The dialogue that had once been filled with anger was now rich with understanding. However, this newfound clarity did not eliminate the weight Ethan carried. He knew the consequences of his actions would not disappear overnight. In the following days, Ethan found himself battling a whirlwind of emotions. He had decided to seek change, but the road ahead was fraught with new obstacles. First, there was the pressure from the police. He learned that the investigations into Lily's case were intensifying, and the uncertainties left him restless. Every time he heard a siren in the distance, his heart raced. The thought of being arrested haunted him, but at the same time, he knew he had to face the truth. To cope with this pressure, Ethan sought support from people he had previously ignored. He remembered Charles, an old friend who had always been by his side, even in the toughest times. After a long hesitation, Ethan decided to call him. The conversation was tense, but Charles listened attentively. He offered advice and encouragement, reminding Ethan that change was a process. "You cannot change the past, but you can choose how to live in the present," Charles said. Those words echoed in Ethan's mind, providing him with some comfort amid the chaos. However, the weight of guilt and shame persisted. He began to isolate himself, fearing that the police would show up at his door at any moment. The nights grew longer, and he found himself held captive by his own thoughts. He often caught himself staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment that had led him to that dead end. Memories of Lily, her laughter, and the plans they had made together tormented him. He wondered if she could truly forgive him, if he would ever be able to redeem himself. Meanwhile, Lily was also grappling with the aftermath of what had happened. After the encounter with Ethan, she felt stronger, but the path to justice remained complicated. The police pressure was mounting, and she had to decide whether to testify against Ethan. With the support of Jake, who had become her safe harbor, she knew she needed to be honest, but the thought of seeing Ethan again made her anxious. Jake encouraged her to focus on her own healing and not to let the desire for revenge consume her. The conversations between Lily and Jake were deep. They often explored the meaning of forgiveness and overcoming adversity. "Life is made of choices, Lily. You can choose to move forward or be stuck in the past," Jake would say, trying to help her see that the future could be brighter. These interactions helped Lily organize her thoughts, but the pain was still present. Ethan, for his part, decided he needed to take concrete action. He began attending therapy, seeking to understand the roots of his self-destructive behavior. In each session, he spoke about his insecurities and how his choices had hurt those he loved most. The therapist helped him see that responsibility was not just a heavy burden but also an opportunity for growth. Over time, Ethan began to accept that change would require effort and time. However, the external pressure continued. The police were getting closer, and rumors about Lily's case spread throughout the city. Ethan received anonymous threatening phone calls, reminding him that the past would never disappear. He found himself in a dilemma. Should he turn himself in and face the consequences of his actions, or hide and wait for the storm to pass? In a moment of introspection, while walking through the streets of the city, Ethan looked at the faces of the people around him. He realized that each of them carried their own story of struggle and pain. This made him reflect on how his own journey was connected to others. He was not a monster, he was a man seeking redemption. This epiphany gave him a new impetus. He decided he would no longer hide. If there was a chance for redemption, he would face the consequences, not just for Lily but for himself. And so, Ethan's life began to change. He committed to being more open and honest, both with himself and with others. Although the path was difficult, he was willing to confront every obstacle that arose. He knew the true battle was still to come, but now he had a new perspective. Each step toward the truth was a step toward freedom. Ethan was at a crucial point in his life. After months of dealing with guilt and shame, he finally decided it was time to change. Charles's words echoed in his mind, urging him to face the truth. Each day, he felt more ready to look into the eyes of the consequences of his actions, even if it meant confronting the police and the past he had been so desperately trying to avoid. Therapy sessions became a vital part of his routine. During each meeting, he opened up about his insecurities and fears. The therapist, a calm and understanding man, helped him realize that change would not come overnight. It was a process that required patience and determination. Ethan began to understand that although he had made mistakes, there was still room for transformation. He was not defined by his failures but rather by how he chose to deal with them. The external pressure continued to grow, and the idea of being arrested still terrified him. However, instead of hiding, he decided to expose himself. During a walk in the park, surrounded by people who seemed so carefree, he felt a connection with humanity. Each face around him carried a story, and suddenly he didn't feel so alone. This epiphany brought a new drive. He realized that, like everyone else, he also deserved the chance to start over. With the support of Charles and his therapist, Ethan began to open up more to others. He reconnected with friends he had neglected and even made new friendships. Each interaction became an opportunity for learning. He heard stories of resilience from people who faced hardships, and by sharing his own experiences, he realized he wasn't the only one fighting his demons. Meanwhile, Lily was also on a journey of self-discovery. With Jake's support, she began to understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting but rather liberating herself from the weight she carried. The conversations between the two were deep and emotional. Jake helped her see that life wasn't just about revenge but about seeking inner peace. This new perspective motivated her to consider her own future, away from the shadows of the past. As Ethan recognized how change was possible, he decided he needed to rehabilitate himself in a concrete way. He started getting involved in community activities, helping to organize events that promoted well-being and solidarity. With each new action, he felt he was not only helping others but also helping himself. The feeling of making a difference, even if small, began to fill the voids that guilt had left in his life. Over time, Ethan started to feel more confident. He allowed himself to dream again, envisioning a future where he could use his experience to help others avoid the same mistakes. He began to write, putting his reflections on pain, resilience, and forgiveness on paper. These words became a form of liberation, allowing him to transform his pain into something that could benefit others. Meanwhile, the investigation into Lily's case continued. Ethan knew that at any moment he could be called to account. But instead of letting fear take over, he decided he was ready to face the situation head-on. He would no longer be a fugitive from his own life. If he had to face the police, he would do it with his head held high, knowing he was trying to do the right thing. The friendship between Ethan and Charles deepened. Charles became an anchor in his life, always reminding him that change was a continuous process. He also began to make new friendships among the volunteers, people who became important in his journey. These connections helped him understand that true wealth lay not in material possessions but in the relationships we build and the lives we touch. Ethan began to see the world with new eyes. He was no longer just a man marked by mistakes but someone in search of redemption. The past still haunted him, but he learned to use that pain as fuel for growth. He was becoming a better version of himself, someone who not only faced challenges but also embraced the opportunity to learn from them. As the days went by, Ethan realized that transformation was not only in his actions but also in his mind and heart. He started to apply the lessons he had learned, not just for himself but to inspire others to overcome their own adversities. And in doing so, he finally found a path to the peace he had long sought. Ethan was about to face the most challenging moment of his life. After months of self-discovery and rebuilding, he learned that the police were about to call him to testify about Lily's case. The thought of facing the authorities terrified him, but at the same time, he felt he could no longer run away. He had worked so hard to become a better person, and now he needed to prove that to himself and to the world. On the morning of the meeting, Ethan woke up with a knot in his stomach. He looked at himself in the mirror and, for the first time in a long time, saw a man who was no longer just a fugitive from his own choices, but someone willing to take responsibility for them. He remembered Charles's words, "Facing the truth is the first step to freedom." With that message in mind, he dressed carefully, choosing a simple shirt that made him feel confident. Upon arriving at the police station, the atmosphere was tense. The smell of coffee and paperwork mingled with the anxiety in the air. Ethan sat in a waiting room, observing the people around him. He saw a nervous man, a woman with a worried expression, and a young person who seemed lost. In each of those faces, Ethan saw a bit of himself. Everyone there was facing their battles, and suddenly he felt less alone. When he was called, his heart raced. He entered the interrogation room, where a detective awaited him. The man's expression was serious, but Ethan remembered everything he had learned. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He shared his story, from the mistakes he made to the journey of self-discovery he had undergone. He didn't leave anything out, even knowing that this could result in severe consequences. The detective listened in silence. When Ethan finished, there was a moment of tension, where the silence felt heavy like a rain-laden cloud. The detective finally broke the silence, asking if he was willing to cooperate with the investigation into what really happened to Lily. The question took Ethan by surprise. He knew this was an opportunity to do what was right, but it was also a huge risk. Ethan hesitated, but the memory of Lily and everything she had faced motivated him. He knew that by speaking up, he could help clarify her situation and, in some way, redeem himself for his own mistakes. He nodded, affirming that he was willing to help. The words flowed from his mouth like a release. He described everything he knew, every detail that could contribute to the truth. While speaking, Ethan felt a wave of relief, and at the same time, a weight lifting off his shoulders. He was no longer running away. He was facing his consequences with courage. The detective took notes, and the expression on his face began to change, revealing a bit of respect for Ethan's honesty. After his testimony, Ethan left the police station feeling different. He had confronted his fear and, more importantly, he had made the right choice. The sense of freedom and inner peace he had been seeking finally enveloped him. He knew the road ahead would still be long, but now he had hope. Upon arriving home, his mind was filled with reflections. He thought about how he had gotten to this point, about the failures that had led him here, and about what it truly meant to start over. He remembered the lessons learned from Charles, the deep conversations with Lily, and the support he had received from his new friends. Life was a journey of ups and downs, and each mistake was an opportunity to learn. Ethan realized that true wealth was not in avoiding problems, but in how he chose to face them. He had discovered that success was not measured by material achievements, but by the ability to rise after falls and to keep fighting for a better future. He committed to using his experience to help others, to become an example of overcoming adversity, and to spread the message that everyone deserves a second chance. That night, while writing in his journal, Ethan felt that he had finally found his voice. He was ready to share his story, his struggles, and his victories. He knew that, regardless of what the future held, he had become a stronger, wiser man, more aware of his role in the world. And, above all, he was determined to make a difference, not just in his life, but in the lives of everyone around him. Ethan sat at his desk, the journal open in front of him. The words he had written earlier were now full of meaning. He had spoken the truth, not just about Lily, but about himself. The weight that had once oppressed him now felt lighter, as if the air around him was fresher. He realized that, even though his journey was far from over, he had taken an important and necessary step. In the days following his testimony, Ethan began receiving messages of support from people he knew. Some were from friends who had helped him during his journey of self-discovery. Others were from strangers, people who had heard his story and felt inspired by his courage. Each message was a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, there was hope and kindness in the world. As he reflected on this, Ethan decided to meet with Charles. They met at a local cafe, and the conversation flowed naturally. Charles seemed proud, and Ethan couldn't help but feel excited as he shared the details of his testimony and how he had decided to cooperate with the investigation. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Charles. Your words have always been with me," Ethan said, looking into his friend's eyes. Charles smiled, a smile that conveyed understanding. "You did the hard work, Ethan. I just pointed the way. You had the courage to move forward, even when everything seemed difficult." Those words touched Ethan deeply. He realized that he was surrounded by people who truly cared about him, and this motivated him even more to move forward. He didn't just want to be a man who had overcome his mistakes. He wanted to be a positive force in the lives of others. However, the reality of the testimony and its consequences began to manifest. The police were still investigating Lily's case, and although Ethan had done his part, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still much to be resolved. He wanted to know what had happened to her, and the pain of uncertainty settled in his heart. One night, while walking through the park, Ethan came across a group of young people talking and laughing. He remembered how, in the past, he too had felt lost and directionless. An impulse led him to them, and even without knowing exactly what to say, he introduced himself and began to share a bit of his story. "I used to be someone who ran away from my problems," he began, his words coming to life as he spoke. "But I learned that facing the truth is what sets us free. And we can all change." The young people listened attentively, some nodding in understanding. At the end of the conversation, one of them, a boy named Lucas, stepped closer. "I'm going through a tough time too. Your story gave me hope," Lucas said, with a sparkle in his eyes. "Thank you for sharing that." Those words touched Ethan in a way he did not expect. Lucas's gratitude made him realize that his journey was not just about himself, but about how he could impact the lives of others. He was beginning to understand that, despite the difficulties, there was a support network that could be created among people facing similar struggles. As the weeks went by, Ethan continued to engage with his community. He started participating in support groups and offering his time to help others find their way. He was no longer a fugitive from his choices. He was becoming a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. That night, while writing in his journal, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but now he felt prepared to face them. The truth that once felt so daunting was now his ally. He had learned the importance of being honest with himself and others, and that had made him a better man. He smiled as he thought about his life. He had found a purpose, a reason to move forward. And above all, he had found a new family among the people who now surrounded him. Ethan was ready for the future, determined to make a difference. Ethan watched the sky turn orange at sunset, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He was no longer the same man who once feared confronting his truth. The experiences he had lived transformed him in ways he could never have imagined. By helping others, he also helped himself, finding a purpose that had previously eluded him. He had become a symbol of resilience and hope, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The messages of support that once moved him were now a constant in his life. Each day, more people approached him, seeking comfort and inspiration. He knew that the pain he once felt was not unique. Many carried their own silent battles. With this in mind, Ethan decided he couldn't stop. He began organizing community gatherings where people could share their stories in a safe and welcoming environment. Over time, these gatherings became a space for learning and friendship, where empathy prevailed. One day, while preparing for one of the gatherings, Ethan received an unexpected message. It was from the police, informing him that they had found new evidence regarding Lily's case. His heart raced. He knew that whatever happened, this could bring relief or more pain. Still, he decided to face this new reality with the courage he had cultivated. When he arrived at the precinct, he saw that the investigation was progressing, and that brought him a glimmer of hope. As he spoke with the detectives, Ethan sensed a feeling of unity among everyone there. He was no longer alone in his fight. The people who once seemed distant were now allies, all seeking justice for Lily. A new determination grew inside him. He not only wanted to know what happened to her, he wanted to ensure that her story was not forgotten. Through his involvement in the investigation, Ethan began to feel increasingly connected to his community. He realized that his journey hadn't ended with his testimony. In fact, it was just beginning. With each new step, he became stronger, more aware of his own capabilities. He learned that past failures do not define who we are, but rather how we choose to rise after each fall. As Lily's story unfolded, Ethan also began to see a new meaning of success. He no longer sought personal recognition or fame. His true success lay in the transformation he witnessed around him. He now understood that true wealth was in human connections, in the friendships that blossomed amidst suffering. At the end of that journey, Ethan felt a wave of gratitude. He had learned not only about himself but about the strength of community, the importance of being vulnerable, and the beauty of helping others. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he was prepared to face them, surrounded by friendships that supported him and the determination to make a difference. Ethan smiled as he looked toward the future. He was finally at peace with himself and his past. The life that once seemed so dark now shone with new possibilities. He had not only overcome his difficulties, he had become a beacon of hope for others, showing that transformation is possible even in the most difficult circumstances. Now, he wanted to invite everyone to reflect on their own journeys. What challenges have you faced, and how have they shaped you? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story could be the inspiration someone needs. And if you enjoyed this journey and want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Together, we can continue to spread hope and transformation. It's time to act, to be the change we wish to see in the world.